Good afternoon, good afternoon. How are we all doing? Everyone good? Awesome, awesome. You get to hear my big booming voice one more time today. I'm very, very sorry about that. I do apologize. Look, we want to talk about the future today. I want to talk about the future in terms of the future of technology and the pace with which technology is moving forward. I just want to get a show of hands. Who in here thinks that technology is moving faster than ever before? Okay, pretty much all of you think technology is moving faster than ever before. Let me just explain a little bit about my background and some of the things that we're going to talk about here in this particular session. So I write for VentureBeat. VentureBeat is one of the big tech news publications. We try every single day to tell you what technology is doing to your daily lives. That's our job. That's what we try to achieve. Now, in addition to telling you the news, telling you about products and services and funding announcements and background stories and all of those wonderful things, 4 years ago, we created a research arm called VB Insight. VB Insight was designed to basically change the way that we do research. There's lots of great research companies out there. They do their research based very much on companies that want to get a white paper written and have their industry or their category looked at, disseminated, reported on, some nice data in there to make sure you know what's going on in that particular space. What we decided to do was something a little bit different. We wanted to tell the story completely from the perspective of the data and the data alone, and not actually allow any company to have any kind of influence on us whatsoever. So we came up with a model where we were able to create research using small data and big data, or qualitative and quantitative analysis, in other words. So what we did is we took small data. Small data for us was something like a survey, and a survey might be not that actually small. When I was researching the conversion optimization industry, I asked over 3,000 conversion optimizers what they felt, what they were using, what was working, what wasn't working, and then we wrote a report based on that data. We talked to over 2,000 social media managers about what they were doing in social media management. So not that small in terms of small data, but still small. In big data, we actually look at huge amounts of data. So for the advertising industry, we got a technology partner to give us 16 billion ad impressions so that we could figure out what was going on in that particular space. And I had a technology partner scrape the JavaScript from 3.2 million US websites just to figure out what products people were using. So we take the small data and big data, we put them together, and they tell a great story, and we do that from data and data alone. Now, one of the things that we saw 3 years ago is that mobile really changed everything. Everything that we were doing, everything we were reporting on, everything we were researching was really down to this little device here that has changed all of our lives, the smartphone. Smartphones have been absolutely incredible. In fact, mobile is the most transformative shift in marketing ever. Certainly since the invention of money, or possibly even language. It's remarkable, in fact, that we're going to end up with, by 2020, 6.1 billion smartphones in use simultaneously. That's almost everyone on the planet will be using a smartphone. We're currently at close to the 3 billion mark. And the smartphone is the device that is always with us. It's the 3-foot device. It is with us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In fact, did you know that on average, the average American wakes up and starts checking their smartphone for notifications within 22 seconds of opening their eyes? The average Stewart Rogers does it within 5 seconds, just so you know. So we are always using them. We're using them for everything now. We're using from pay. So you've got Android Pay, Apple Pay, you have Venmo and PayPal, you've got m-commerce sites. In fact, in 2016, mobile phones and smartphones influenced $500 billion of retail sales just in the United States. We use them for social media. We use them to share our lives with people. We use them to basically create these huge digital footprints that people like Twitter and Facebook and Google can use to target advertisements to us. And we're always sharing. We're sharing our locations. We're sharing what we're doing. We're mostly sharing pictures of our food on Instagram, but that's another issue, and we're not going to get into that today. And we use them to play. We use them to play Pokemon Go, for example. People think of that as an augmented reality solution. an augmented reality game. It really wasn't, but it did get augmented reality into the consumer psyche. It did get those words augmented reality into the news. Previously, before Pokemon Go, most people thought of this category of entertainment as virtual reality. Augmented reality only became really a popular term after Pokemon. We use it for entertainment. We use it to listen to music. We watch movies on our smartphones, even though they're tiny screens. Sometimes we strap them to our heads with a piece of plastic just to make it seem a little bit more immersive. And we use them to live stream, and we use them to create content. Everybody out there now is a content creator. Everybody, every single one of us can go and create an entire video series and publish it and get it out to people. This is the future that we have been building for ourselves. And of course, we use them for retail. We use them to buy things. We use them to research. In fact, it's really interesting that 80% of people, based on our studies, rely on a smartphone now before they rely on a salesperson. They will do all of their research on a smartphone before purchasing. They will not want to talk to another human being. Remember, this is the future we have been creating for ourselves. Ever since a mobile phone used to be a car battery with a phone attached to the side of it, now we've got to this situation where we don't even want to talk to people anymore. We're much more reliant on our smartphones than we imagine. But we're also talking to other devices. We're not talking to humans, but we are talking to devices a lot. Amazon Echo, really interesting from Amazon. They were the early adopter on this. They were the people that came out first with something that was conversational UI that worked, that got into the market before Google for once. Of course, Amazon Echo has been really changing things for a lot of people. You can just stand there, you can talk to a device, it will do what you want it to do. It will play music for you. It will answer questions for you. It will tell you what your agenda is. It will tell you what's going on that day, what the weather is like. It'll actually tell you whether you need to wear a coat or not. Of course, the answer in Riga is always yes, even in the summer. And you will talk to your device all day. Amazon Echo is really interesting because a lot of people think of it as artificial intelligence. It kind of is, but it's really not. It knows a lot of skills. It understands how to do things for you based on programs that people have written. Google Home, on the other hand, is probably much closer to real AI. In fact, Google has real AI embedded within Google Assistant, embedded within Google Home. The assistant that Google uses is across all of their devices now. And of course, Siri was the original smartphone-based assistant, conversational UI on Apple. Again, not really AI, but does know a lot of tricks, can do a lot of fun things for you. So we're getting to this point now where you're talking to your devices, and people are doing that more and more often. One interesting thing is that they're not doing it very often in public. Because let's be fair, when you're out in public, you can be on your phone and you can be searching for absolutely anything on your phone and nobody knows you're doing it. But when you start talking to your device and say things like, hey, can you tell me what time my appointment is with the clinic today? Everybody can hear that, and nobody wants to do that. It's also very difficult still to get people to pay for things on their mobile devices because just that concept of having a smartphone in one hand and publicly having your credit card out in the other and punching all the details in is quite interesting and difficult. And certainly you would not want to do that via any kind of conversational UI in a public place because you're literally standing there reading out your credit card details and somebody else will be able to type them down and use them against you. So we still have a long way to go in terms of conversational UI being really, really prevalent in our public lives, but in our private lives, when we have speakers in our houses, or when we're behind closed doors and we can talk to our devices, we are choosing to do that in larger and larger numbers. And of course, AI is starting to really change everything for us. I don't know if you know this, but artificial intelligence is already changing your entire life, and it's already involved in every part of everything you do. We've seen it in chatbots. Chatbots are a place where a lot of artificial intelligence happens. This example on the screen is an example of a not AI chatbot. A lot of the chatbots that you'll have seen already are these decision tree systems, so it's kind of like an old choose your own adventure book, where you're basically being served up choices and you select which one you want to go forward with. But we are seeing more and more and more some real artificially intelligent chatbots that can answer almost any question for you whatsoever, regardless of what you type. And the ones that are really, really smart are looking at the questions that you type, and if they can't provide an answer, they're learning from the fact that they can't provide an answer, and they're figuring out what the answer might be for future people who ask the same or the similar question. So we're seeing that in chatbots. AI is also affecting your daily lives right now because every time you search for a product on Amazon, every time you watch a movie on Netflix, every time you do something in almost any kind of mobile or e-commerce environment, it is working out what you're doing. It's working out what other people who are similar to you have done. It's then giving you product recommendations. It's working out exactly how to advertise to you. It's working out exactly what you like, what you don't like, and it's putting you into all of these segments, these ever reducing segments, until it gets you down to as close to a segment of one as possible, so that it can hyper-personalize everything to you in the future, and basically sell you anything that it thinks you might like. And that is where we're going with all of this. Artificial intelligence is really useful, it is really informative, it can be incredibly helpful, but let's make no mistake about it. Everybody out there that is involved in, invested in, and doing interesting things in artificial intelligence is doing so in order to sell you something because they want your money. And in fact, if you think about that selling, even the chatbots that are the decision tree ones, when we looked at whether people had bought something via a chatbot or not, actually 45% of people have already purchased things through chatbots. That's really quite remarkable. That's almost a tipping point where messaging apps are being used to purchase things more than websites and apps. Of course, they probably bought a pizza because Domino's launched a chatbot and everybody went and bought a pizza just to see if it worked or not. I'll admit I did do that one time. But when you look at whether people are repeating their purchases, actually 20% of people have bought more than one time. In fact, they're buying several times through chatbots using AI. Virtual reality is another thing that's quite interesting and something that's shaping our future. With virtual reality, what we've seen and what is quite remarkable is that there are millions and millions and millions of pieces of plastic out there and sometimes pieces of cardboard transforming your mobile phones into virtual reality devices or standalone devices such as PlayStation VR, Oculus Rift, and HTC Vive. Now, it's incredibly interesting to look at this space because VR is amazing from a top-down perspective. We have seen some really incredible examples of VR changing our lives, changing the future for us. I've personally seen an experience that shows you exactly what it is like to be an autistic child. And when you experience that, it's incredibly powerful. In fact, donations to autism charities from people who'd seen that and experienced that incredibly immersive, emotional experience went up by 400% because of it. I've seen systems that are incredibly rudimentary. If you looked at them, you'd think that they were something like a computer-generated Disney movie from the 1920s. I know we didn't have computers back then, but you get my point. It's very low fidelity. But when people were exposed to these experiences, no matter how rudimentary they were, after 20 minutes, burns victims were actually able to have more pain relief for longer than taking opioids or any other kind of real pain relief. So virtual reality can really affect us in an incredible way. The problem with virtual reality is that consumers aren't adopting it. Last year, there were over 16.5 million pieces of plastic and cardboard sold to Americans. And when you look at the monthly active users of VR apps, the things that you need to launch in order to have these experiences, they hover around about 16 to 20,000 monthly users. And that's very, very bad news for the VR industry. What is much more interesting is when we get to augmented reality, that really will change everything. Augmented reality has the opportunity to be the operating system of the future for us. But only when it gets to the point where augmented reality glasses look just like this and not massive ski masks, and only to the point where they'll work in daylight, because many of the systems right now just don't. They don't work in daylight. We need to be able to walk around and actually have our vision augmented in order for AR to really take hold. That hasn't stopped people launching into the VR landscape. There are millions of, well, not millions, there are actually $13.5 billion of investment in the VR space in the United States alone at this point. There are companies cropping up all the time trying to turn virtual reality into something useful. And one day someone will. They'll create that killer app and then we'll care more about it from a consumer perspective. In fact, 62% of people have tried VR or want to try VR. So we are kind of getting there. We'll see what happens with VR. AR is definitely more exciting. But when you pair AI and VR and AR together, things start to get very interesting. And just from point of view of AI, it is an incredible space to be in. If you're thinking of setting up an AI company right now, first of all, be aware that cognitive computing is a much bigger space than just artificial intelligence. It could be that you're in machine learning, data mining, statistics. AI is a very important segment of that. In fact, the cognitive computing marketplace is set to reach 12.5 billion in 2019. So it is really, really big business. But AI is going to affect all of us in all of these different ways. It's affecting us right now in terms of the way that we are thinking of our mobility and transportation. This was the Google self-drive car. I think we can all agree that it looks like a toy, and it's pretty ugly and disgusting. So let's put a Tesla up on the screen instead. I know that there's a few fans of Tesla here. We've been driving around in them and doing a little bit of carpool karaoke this week, which has been fun. Tesla's quite interesting because what they've been doing is collecting millions upon millions upon millions of miles of real driver data and then using machine learning to determine the patterns that would suggest good driving behavior. And then every 2 weeks, they're downloading those patterns back into every single car so that the autopilot feature becomes better and smoother and more reliable as it goes forward. In fact, they had created 780 million miles of driver data by the end of 2017, and they're collecting 1 million every 10 hours. It really is quite a phenomenal impact. So taking all of this driver data and using it to make sure that we drive safer and better in the future. And Google has been taking on artificial intelligence in huge numbers. They had very few projects in 2012 that were real AI that were doing anything important. But by 2015, they'd already got to over 2,700 deep learning projects. And what they've been doing is putting that into every single device that is humanly possible to do so. In fact, Android Wear 2 saw us put Google Assistant inside a watch. So we are now in this situation where we're turning every single device into an artificially intelligent device with incredible power and incredible capability to affect our daily lives. And that's really, really important. But there's one thing that you absolutely have to know about all of this. We've been talking about the fast pace of technology. We've been talking about how AI is affecting us, how AR and VR are affecting us, how all of the technology around smartphones has been affecting us dramatically and drastically over the last few years. And when I asked right at the start, who here thinks the pace of technology is moving faster than ever before, you virtually all put your hands up. But here's the thing. When we really think about this technology, we have to look at it in terms of, is it making a minor change? Is it making an optimization on what we do right now? Or is it actually changing our entire culture? If it's changing our entire culture, we have to think about technology very differently. Let me give you an example based on our friend, the self-driving car, or even let's take it back to just the electric car. So think of electric cars for a moment. Think of the difference in using an electric car versus using something that uses petrol or diesel right now. When you're driving a petrol or diesel car, you're watching that needle get lower and lower and lower. And when it gets to the point where you feel uncomfortable or where you're close enough to a petrol station, you drive in, you fill up, you drive out, you carry on. There is no forward planning needed for that process other than maybe a little bit of searching on Google Maps to see where the next station is. Electric cars, by and large, you are required to know how much battery you've got, what kind of mileage you've got before the battery runs out. You then have to plan in advance where the electric chargers are in order to recharge that car. Because if you're going to do a long journey, you're going to have to plan that out. And you might have to plan it out around maybe lunch. because you might need that time in order to get enough juice back into the battery to make the rest of your journey stick. That's an entirely different process. It's an entirely different procedure. And as a result, it means it's a cultural change. And whenever we have cultural change, it does not matter how fast the technology moves. It's going to take a generation before it beds in and becomes mainstream. And that's the point with technology in general. And also, just on the last note, when we think about the way that AI is changing our purchasing habits, giving us recommendations, Yelp does this. When we think about how AI is completely changing the way that we do traditional things like SEO, it's doing it better than anybody can do it, as a human being. It's doing it automatically for us now. It's answering questions. KLM, for example, have chatbots that take a big chunk of the initial questions when people have got a problem, or even when people just want to praise them, and then they hand it off to a real person to close the deal. And those real people actually make a huge amount of money for them. They make about $166,000 per person revenue per employee every single year answering these questions. But the initial questions are answered by AI because we don't want people to be handling menial questions, because that's when they get disenchanted with their jobs. But the reality of AI, the reality of all of this, is that any time it changes things culturally, it takes a generation to bed in. And any time we give people the power to buy something, to use it, they will use it in one of two ways. And I'll leave you with this example. Tencent uses artificial intelligence in order to augment human beings and answer menial questions very, very quickly so that human beings can have a nice job to do. Whereas Xiaomi have replaced 2/3 of their workforce with artificial intelligence. Ultimately, if you work for an autocratic boss, AI will take your job. So just know this. Go work for nice people. You'll be fine. Thank you very much.